Welcome to Don't Fear the Weight podcast with your host Vicky and Sumi, bringing together science and personal experience.
Hi guys, welcome back to another episode of Don't Fear the Weight with me, your host, as always, in the hot seat, Vicky and Sumi, aka the Tiny Titan, and I have a returning guest because all of you, or not maybe not all of you, but a good huge percentage of you have been saying that you miss the chats that myself and Mr. Lyle McDonald do have on a regular basis. So, Lyle, welcome back. How are you?
Good, thank you for having me. We'll get into it, but you asked me to research a question that I don't have an answer for, so this should be fun.
It's always going to be a fun conversation that we always do. Now, Lyle, obviously, as people know, you do not need any kind of introduction at all or reintroduction. You've been on the podcast a number of occasions. So let's have a quick update on how you are, because obviously it's been a while since we've had a chat.
Yeah.
So long in fact that you thought that I'd moved to Australia, right?
I don't know why. I still think your accent sounds more Australian. I think part of it is years ago I was involved with someone who was from the UK but had lived in Australia and ended up with kind of this weird mixed kind of accent. And there's also just the fact that I'm an American and all foreign language, even British, sounds like clicks and whistles to us. So as the joke goes.
That's true.
You know, America, the UK, and Australia, 3 countries separated by a common language. So, all I kind of hear is, like, if y'all have Charlie Brown and Snoopy, pretty much when y'all talk, it's just wah, 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 wah. We Americans think all foreign countries are the same. So anyway.
Fantastic. So you're doing really well. You're spending a lot of time in the gym with Sumi at the moment, yeah?
Yeah, that's pretty much my full-time job at this point. She's pretty demanding. She's made it very clear to me that, like, even if I had time, I am not to train anybody else. Like, she's like, yeah, you know, especially not a competitor. We were at a meet last year, and somebody came up who was like, wow, you've really done a lot with your squat technique. You know, maybe I should, get with you to improve mine. And Sumi was like, I'll kill you. Like, she's like, don't even think about training anybody else. I'm like, oh, okay. So yes, I'm in the gym with her a lot. We just came off of a meet. I guess it's 5.5 weeks ago. I took her to a Masters Cup and she set some monster records in the 105.8 weight class, which is tiny. I don't know where you compete, but that was 48 kilos, I want to say.
Oh, yeah, she's tiny. So I'm the category above. So I do in like 52 kilos.
Yeah, she normally competes there. And what had happened was for a meet, we kind of over dehydrated her because I thought there was a Wilks thing. And we got her to like halfway in between, like 50 kilos. I was like,
Yeah.
For a little bit. We could probably get you into the 48s where there's not a lot of competition, especially in the Masters category. So we've taken her down twice. She made a 67.5 kilo bench, which is 147.5 pounds for Americans, and then a 147.5 kilo deadlift, which was 325 pounds, which was just, it was an enormous pull for like, that's triple body weight. Like, she is built to deadlift in a way she is not built to squat. And so that said both national and world records, and I suspect they're going to hold. I'll be stunned if anyone can take those at that body weight. So her squat, on the other hand, we won't talk about.
Yeah. I have seen that you've started incorporating different methods now. So doing some chain squats and things like that with her.
She's got really long femurs, really long upper thighs, and I told her early on, like, you're never going to be a great squatter. Like, she's a good squatter. She's done, I want to say 95 kilos, 215 pounds once at, 150, which is not a bad squat, but she's just always going to be limited. I realized this last cycle, like, her deadlift has tons of assistance work where we do stuff that improves off the floor and lockout in the middle, and her squat, I kind of just had her squatting, and I'm like, okay, I couldn't, like, and I've talked to some friends of mine who are coaches, and they're like, box squats will just mess up her technique. We don't have a safety squat bar. Like, a lot of the things people would use to work the top, we don't have access to. So I'm going to try some chains. I've tried some belt squatting with some chains to try to overload that top position, and we'll see what happens. So
Fab. Well, I'm excited to have a look at those progresses. Now, you were talking about decreasing Sumi's body weight. Now, I'm not going to talk about the dehydration aspect, but I think that this leads us into quite a nice caveat into what we're going to be talking about there. So she dieted down to the 48s, and obviously she carries quite a lot of muscle mass as well for somebody.
Right. Well, we actually, like, I don't know how you approach cutting weight. We actually do it all in the last week. She stays really lean year round because she gets like 20,000 steps. It was all food and water manipulation. We do it all in the last week because she stays about 52 kilos, 112, 113 pounds, and it's a pretty aggressive weight drop. It's close to 10%. But we've also got a 24-hour weigh-in, so she's got, and that makes a big difference.
Huge difference, yeah, massive.
But yeah, we didn't really have to diet her down. I mean, she's pretty much got a full six-pack year-round and stays pretty lean. But it does, raise the question of women dieting down that do have high muscle mass, which I know is what you wanted to talk about. So.
Yeah, for sure. So because we only have a 2-hour weigh-in over here for our meets that we do, we cannot do that kind of aggressive cut in the last week because it would just mess up our leverages, the dehydration protocol and everything would just be absolutely detrimental. Yeah. So if we talk about menstrual cycle disturbances in accordance with those weight losses, but still kind of taking into consideration the amount of muscle mass somebody actually carries as a female.
Right.
Now I know that we kind of scoured all of the studies and things to see if we could find something, but we didn't really find anything that's there. But you were talking about a really way back when study, so let's dive into that.
So we go like way back in the day, it's way back but recent, right? Like I did some historical research. Women really only got heavily into sport, at least in the U.S., really the late 70s. And other countries of very great interest to me, like Russia and Germany, they got women into sport much earlier because this was back, the Olympics were being used to, really promote your political ideology. And they realized that the women's competition wasn't there. So, and they also, this really surprised me, Russia, and I want to say the late 50s, early 60s, really lobbied the International Olympic Committee to add more women's events. Not because they were egalitarian feminists, they wanted more medal opportunities. I mean, the end result was the same. And once America saw that Russia was dominating, they realized they had to get into the game. And in a very real way, Russia and Germany sort of paved the way for the changes that occurred in America. So we moved to the 70s. Title 12 was like really the big thing in the U.S., which was it wasn't addressing sport specifically, but it was a federal law that said that public schools, any school that received public monies, and in the U.S., public and private are reversed. Right?
Okay.
In the US, public schools are free and private schools, and I know in the UK it's reversed, or at least that's my understanding. All public schools had to offer equal opportunity to boys and girls, or to males and females. And I mean, this included everything: art, music, band. But it had a crossover that it happened to include sport because sports programs were part of it. And at the time, there was a big debate. Is the reason women or girls, and I'm like, we're talking about middle school, we're talking about teens more than anything. So I'm not using girls to be like derogatory to women. I'll just say females and move on with my life to avoid that problem. And the question was, are they not entering sport because they're not interested, biologically or culturally, or because they don't have access? And it rapidly turned out that as soon as they were given access, the numbers just went like this. Okay. They went from being a tiny percentage of the overall sporting community. By the late 80s, early 90s, boys' numbers males' numbers hadn't really changed at either the high school or collegiate level, but women's numbers just kept going up and up and up. So it really was an access thing. So as that happened and we got into the 80s, all of a sudden researchers started seeing this enormous menstrual cycle dysfunction and other things, eating disorders and bone density. And at the time, they called it the Female Athlete Triad. Sure. Like the different things, which I still, given what we know causes it, I find ironic or a poor choice that the acronym is FAT.
Yeah.
We've always found that, and this is a super random thing. I put this up in my group. This is unrelated. There's been some question, right? We know that you can't apply studies on men to women automatically.
Mm-hmm.
And except in weight loss, most studies are on women. And there's been the question, are women-oriented weight loss programs appropriate for men? And the answer is no. And they did some early work, and men's weight loss programs oriented around sports affiliation and male humor, which I take to mean fart jokes.
Correct. Yeah.
I saw a paper recently. It came out of Ireland, and they did a male-specific weight loss program that they called Men on the Move. So the acronym was MOM. And who in the hell was thinking? Like, what were they thinking? So anyway, FAT, the Female Athlete Triad.
Yeah.
Before I get too far off topic. I think it's a poor acronym. It's been changed in recent years, and we'll get to that. And it encompassed menstrual cycle dysfunction. And at the time, all they knew was, so normal menstrual cycle is called eumenorrhea. EU just means good or normal. Oligomenorrhea was an infrequent cycle between 35 to 90 days. And it turns out that may have a different cause. That may be related to testosterone being higher more so than diet. And then amenorrhea, which is a loss of the menstrual cycle.
Yeah.
And turns out there's a couple in-between steps that aren't that, but at the time, the problem is the in-between steps you can't see, right? You still have a menstrual cycle, you still menstruate, but there are issues going on. So they were looking at that, and they saw this really increased incidence of that in female athletes. So the question then became why? And a number of theories were thrown out. My all-time favorite was that, so we know that nipple stimulation raises prolactin, and prolactin can actually shut it. It is a method of birth control done properly. Mm-hmm. Somebody theorized that runners who frequently had this, that the up and down movement within their sports bras was causing sufficient nipple stimulation to raise prolactin. And I just, we didn't know what we didn't know, but I just think that's awesome. It's like a piece of trivia only like I would ever come across. Other theories, the big one at the time was that it was a body fat percentage issue.
Sure,
and
yeah.
It made very logical sense. Even at the time, we kind of knew that women had to, or girls had to reach a certain body fat percentage before puberty would start. And the idea was, well, body fat is necessary to support reproduction and childbirth and we know that that's more or less correct now, right? Leptin, there's something called kisspeptin neurons, and nobody listening to this cares. But there's a critical body fat threshold, kind of. And we also have seen in the modern era, girls are starting puberty and boys are hitting puberty earlier. And there's a lot of potential reasons, but some of it is thought to be the increase in childhood obesity. Children are hitting that body fat threshold sooner. So we knew that. So it got reversed. And the theory, and I forget who proposed this, was that below a certain body fat percentage, women's bodies, kind of sensed that there was insufficient storage fat and would shut off the menstrual cycle. And I think, I forget if it was 18 or 22% that was thrown around. I don't remember. It's been a while since I've looked at this. And that's both wrong and right. It was wrong in the sense that later research found that you'd find women at 24% who'd lost their cycle and women at 12% that still had it. So there's totally no absolute cutoff. At the same time, in the area of leptin, right? Leptin's a hormone made from your fat cells. It tells your brain how much you're eating and how much fat you're carrying, is a big player in this. And women who've lost their menstrual cycle have lower leptin. We know that as we diet, leptin goes down. It's part of the coordinated increase in hunger, slowing in metabolic rate. Men can eventually become hypogonadal. Their testosterone will eventually crater at very low body fats, right? That's the irony of guys dieting, right? They diet to get six packs because they think it'll get them women, but nothing works. That's the comedy of it. But for women, and women's bodies are more sensitive to this. So in a sense, body fat is part of it, but it wasn't that if you are lower than this, it'll happen. Yeah. So that was one idea. And then that got kind of extended, and that kind of brings us to what we were talking about, which we know that in women's body fat, estrogen is produced there. Right, women produce estrogen in their ovaries, but testosterone conversion to estrogen in fat cells per se is a source of estrogen. And it's thought that in postmenopausal women, part of why women gain more body fat may be the body attempting to keep estrogen levels a little bit higher. Yeah. So in that sense, and we can maybe argue, is it the absolute amount of body fat? Is it the body fat percentage? And I don't remember what the research has said, which one is really the bigger determinant of leptin levels. But women with lower body fat will have lower leptin, even if they're eating at maintenance, right? If you maintain even at 15%, your leptin will be much lower than if you're at 24%.
Sure.
So that was part of it. And that sort of ties into having more muscle mass. There was some theories, and this was a reverse thing. They kept seeing elevated testosterone in women with irregular menstrual cycles. And it was presumed that some aspect of training or some aspect of their body composition was raising testosterone. It now looks like it's the opposite. It's women who have elevated testosterone due to polycystic ovary syndrome. There's a subclinical hyper where women have like 30% above normal testosterone. That can, and women with PCOS, polycystic ovary syndrome, very commonly oligomenoreic or amenorrheic, and they lose their menstrual cycle. That's a hallmark symptom. And one of the diagnostic criteria. So at the time, they didn't know that. They thought that the training was raising testosterone, which was impairing things. Now it looks like the elevated testosterone is causing the problem in reverse. Right. And I don't know that, muscle mass per se doesn't have a big relationship to testosterone. So those are kind of some of the old ideas. And there's also a stress theory that if you expose women's bodies to either physical or mental stress, that could cause it. And on the mental stress tip, or in that idea, there are studies showing that women who are, how can I put this gently? It's your podcast. Nobody needs gently. Women who are certain kind of crazy.
Yep.
And basically crazy themselves into menstrual cycle dysfunction. There's a certain it's a hormonal response to stress. They tend to be very tightly wound. They're perfectionists. They are very responsive to external validation. They're frequently rigid eaters. And if that doesn't describe most physique competitors, I don't know what does, right? And I'm not saying this is a negative. I think to a degree, to be a physique competitor,
you need that.
You have to be a little bit crazy, right? Yeah. You have to almost, and I hate to say this, but it's true. Like, you don't need to have an eating disorder, but it helps.
It helps.
Or at least, because if you're not willing to starve yourself to the limits, you won't get there. You won't get to stage. Strength power athletes have to make a weight class. There's similarities, but generally they're not, unless they have to, they're not trying to get to 10 to 12% body fat. They're trying to get within the range that they could dehydrate without tanking performance. They also do it short term, which I think is a big part of it. In general, most strength power athletes will diet for the month they have to, and then go back to eating like piggies so they can get their body weight back up and get strong again, right? It's a different kind of neurosis. Anyway, so there's a mental stress factor. But the thing is, in those studies, the women who were mentally stressed were eating a little bit less. They're also eating very low fat diets, like 12% fat. So there were other studies that took young girls at camp and threw them into like 5 kilometers. No, it was 10 miles. What is that? Like, God almighty. Just a ton of running immediately. Like, not a buildup, not a gradual increase. Just like, all right, first day at camp, you're going to go run, 15 kilometers on top of all your other activity. And they saw that a majority got menstrual cycle dysfunction. And the girls who lost more weight got it worse.
Sure.
Problem was that it was very hard to differentiate these, because athletes, runners especially, it's usually athletes in sports fitness sports, running, ballet, gymnastics, figure skating, cyclists not so much, less so, but that's where they saw the real menstrual cycle dysfunction. Well, the average runner is a different kind of crazy. We saw a runner in Austin running yesterday. It's 100 degrees here. I believe that's like 40 degrees Celsius.
Yeah.
In the middle of the day, running at lunchtime. I have seen runners at 6 a.m. in the dark on icy sidewalks running with a flashlight. Runners are a different kind of crazy.
Yeah.
They have to, but they're running six and sometimes 7 days a week. They're running 120 miles, which is like 200 kilometers a week. They're starving themselves because they want to be as light as possible. And like I said, they're a different kind of crazy. Separating all this out, separating the training volume from the dieting, from the mental stress, very hard to do because it tends to cluster. So jump forward to, I want to say late 90s, early 2000s. Researcher named Ann Lukes decided she was going to look at this because she looked at like the body fat thing didn't seem to hold. There was clearly something else going on. She did these really rigidly controlled studies where she took women who were doing no exercise at a certain calorie level, and she either had them do a pile of exercise over 5 days or reduce calories a ton, but not both.
Okay.
And the idea was to create the same deficit, either through exercise or with diet. And this had to do with what she called energy availability. And what energy availability represents is your calorie intake minus your exercise expenditure. So if you're eating 2,000 calories and you're exercising 400 calories, your energy availability is 1,600.
Correct.
But you can think of that as the number of calories left over to the body to drive all the things that occur, to keep our brain working, our heart working, lungs, metabolic rate, reproductive function. And there were already early ideas that if that falls too low, the body has to make choices about what it keeps running. And our brains have to work. Well, unless you're on the internet, in which case you can turn them off. Your heart and lungs have to keep working. Your kidneys have to work. What do a lot of extreme dieters notice? Their hair stops growing. Because it falls out. Their nails stop growing because those aren't critical, right? Those aren't required to keep you alive. Metabolic rate goes down, but reproductive function in the short term is not critical for survival. So if there's insufficient calories, that gets shut off. And what Luke's first found, she just created this ridiculous, it was like 10 calories per kg energy availability, right? So if you're a 52-pound lifter, their body was receiving like 520 calories a day. It was just an enormous amount of activity or an enormous amount of dieting. And what she found was that mostly they did the same thing. Exercise was a little bit different than diet, but not enormously. Now, these were 5-day studies. And what she saw was not menstrual cycle dysfunction, because that can't happen that fast. What she saw was a drop in luteinizing hormone mainly, and that controls hormone production, reproductive function. In men, luteinizing hormone rate is involved with testosterone, follicle stimulating hormone is involved. In men, it's sperm production, but in women, it's the production of the egg. She saw all these changes that would predict menstrual cycle, because you can't do this to women for the months that it would take. So first she established that, okay, boom, below at this super low level, things go, they get screwed up, which is a technical physiological term. They get effed up. So then she started doing more specific stuff to see if there was a threshold. So she would take women and it would be like, and energy availability is normalized related to lean body mass, right? That's what we have to support, not fat mass so much. So it's energy availability, it's calories per kg calories per kg of lean body mass, or calories per pound for, again, the one country that I live in that still uses non-metric units.
Yeah.
America. I'm so proud of my country. So she was like, okay, 50 calories per kg, 40, 30, 20, 10, these really systematic short-term studies. And she found in the short term, 30 was the cutoff, right? 30 calories per kg, which is 13.6 calories per pound, somewhere in that range. I mathed it out before. That was the cutoff point. That if you were above that, luteinizing hormone, and realize there's a whole host of things that happen. Thyroid hormone goes down, insulin-like growth factor 1 goes down, and that's part of bone health. Metabolic rate goes down, cortisol goes up. Like there's this whole cluster of things that happen. And she found in the short term, 30 was the cutoff. Okay. And did a pile of studies, and basically, and that was, and for a while, this was like a decade ago, everyone was like, don't ever diet below that level, which is great in theory, but if you're dieting for a physique show, you won't get into shape doing that. At some point, you have to go below that level to reach 10% body fat. This is just, it sucks, but it's just the way of the world. So good advice, but you can't actually follow it. More later stuff looked at it and was like, well, some women below 30 still have their menstrual cycle, but all women who don't have their menstrual cycle are below 30. If that makes sense, right? So being below 30 doesn't guarantee you'll lose it. But if you have lost it, you will be below that level, right? So it's necessary but not guaranteed.
And sorry, just to interrupt you on that one, Lyle, for the amount of caloric intake, did she actually look at the macronutrient split as well, or was that just calorie intake?
It was mainly calorie intake. And one thing that was part of the reason she thought that exercise was different than diet, and it was aerobic exercise, was that was increasing fat oxidation.
Yeah.
And there's some indication that brain is monitoring carbohydrate level in the short term. So as much as energy availability, she suggested it was glucose availability.
Okay.
And exercise, you start increasing fat oxidation. So there's still more carbs for the brain. Whereas if you because when we cut calories, right, protein has to stay high.
Sure.
Fat only goes so low, invariably carbs get cut. And I think that's what she was manipulating. So to my knowledge, she never looked directly at macro percentages. Other stuff kind of indirectly, they've invariably found that women on very low fat diets are more likely low protein, like all the things that the average dieter does wrong in physique and strength power athletes. Well, physique athletes will cut fat too low, but protein is never an issue in the physique or strength power sports.
Sure.
If anything, it's eating too much. But anyway, so then later they started looking at different energy availabilities over longer terms or in athletes. And they found that, okay, the lower your energy availability, it was predictive of menstrual cycle dysfunction. And it could be one of those middle levels, which are luteal phase defect and anovulation, which don't worry about it. Listeners, it's just there are stages of dysfunction. It was predictive, but there were no guarantees. They've also found women at like 32, 33 who have lost their menstrual cycle. However, this is between a 5-day study and dieting for 3 or 4 or 5, 6 months, right? And that's got to do with body fat, right? Even if you're at a little higher calorie level, as body fat goes down and leptin goes down, the body's eventually going to adapt. There's just no getting around it. What Luke's studies really showed was that if you go below that sooner rather than later, you cause problems sooner rather than later. And this gets into like optimal dieting and how many people do it wrong. What if physique? Oh, I'm going to cut calories and jump into 2 hours of aerobics a day. Yeah. And boom, right off the bat, they go right below threshold. They get menstrual cycle dysfunction in a month and they keep it for 5 months.
Yeah.
Whereas if you can avoid that as long as humanly possible by starting at a higher calorie intake, dieting gradually, giving yourself time, you may not hit it till the last 4 to 6 weeks. You may still lose your cycle, right? It's more a matter of when than if you're going to 10%, but you want to limit it as much as possible. So it's not that 30 is this super exact cutoff. You can be a little bit higher, but if you're dieting long-term, eventually your body's going to respond to it. If you go below that, that's super, super duper predictive. And so basically energy availability seems to be, and she concluded that it is the factor, almost to the point that it's the only factor. Like I said, body fat plays a role. Stress, I think, plays a role. She has written a paper that I honestly believe is in like military medicine. Somehow I came across this stupid thing. I firmly believe I'm the only person who's read it. I even emailed her about it, never heard back, which really frustrated me.
Yeah.
And she argued that all stress is energetic calorie stress. And she made a decent argument. She showed that like people who are mental stressed, frequently that mental stress will raise energy expenditure, right? It also decreases hunger. And I've been working on my stress and anger diet for years now, right? If you want to lose weight quickly, get super stressed about stuff. Be like depressed and unhappy and like stressed over your life. It's a fantastic, it's not a best way to lose, but you'll lose a lot of weight.
Yeah.
Right? And there's also research that no matter how much exercise you're doing, if you're eating at calorie balance, that reverses the problem. And they did a couple in monkeys. There's a very famous study I love from way back in the day. They took special forces, like male special forces guys. They put them on 4 hours of sleep, about 400 calories a day. They were doing like 16 hours of activity with heavy packs. They called it a multi-stressor environment, and I think that's putting it mildly. For 6 weeks or whatever, they were all at 4% body fat. Their testosterone levels were castrate. Cortisol was off the map. Thyroid was off the map. Cortisol was like everything was just, like I said, effed up, to put it in physiological, technical terms.
Mm-hmm.
But when we fed them for a week to calorie maintenance, everything came back up to normal. So Luke's argument is that stress is simply is more, but others have argued the opposite because they've argued that dieting is a psychosocial stressor, and it is, right? Dieting is hard biologically, but if you're a little bit, we all want it to happen faster. We get very stressed. If you're on a time schedule, it's way worse because if you don't get in shape, general dieter shouldn't have to worry about this. They do, but for the general dieter, there's no time frame. If your physique contest or if your powerlifting meet, your Olympic lifting meet, your strong woman meet is on June 7th, you got to be in shape by June 7th.
Yeah.
You don't get a do-over if you're not there. So, and there's also research that behavior therapy, cognitive behavioral therapy, can reverse menstrual cycle dysfunction. Now, maybe it's because they're eating more, but I think there's also just that mental stress factor. That alone, you can stress yourself sick, right? One of my favorite books called Why Zebras Don't Get Ulcers. It's one of my top 5, one of those, if you had to be on a desert island, book questions. And no, I don't have 4 others. You can. Chronic stress can make you sick. Chronic stress will tank your immune system. Chronic stress will do all kinds of bad things. So I don't know that I agree with her completely at face value that stress is only energetic, but energy availability really is the key player. There's other factors that I think play a role, like fat intake, like body fat percentage. But she's definitely kind of demonstrated, And if you take women with menstrual cycle dysfunction and give them more calories, generally menstrual cycle function will resume. Now, not universally, and that's a whole separate question we can get into. Some of it is that athletes are crazy, and it's always endurance athletes. Like I said, they're a special kind of crazy. So they will tell a runner, I want you to take a day off and eat more. Good luck.
Yeah, it's not going to happen.
And either they don't do it, or if they take a day off, they just train harder on the days they're training. Yeah. They're so terrified of gaining body fat. They're so terrified of eating more. Like I said, and that starts to get into eating disorder symptomology, maybe not full-blown clinical, but subclinical. And even actually going back to that, it's always been thought that sport causes eating disorders. But I've seen an argument that says, well, maybe if you've got a specific type of eating disorder, subclinical, maybe that's what makes you good at sport.
Yeah, for sure.
Maybe the menstrual cycle, maybe running doesn't give you this super thin body and loss of menstrual cycle. Maybe being super thin to begin with is why you're good at, and there's some truth to that. So I think it's hard to really set, but yeah, they won't eat more and they won't cut their training back. And you see that certainly in physique athletes.
Yeah.
You've seen that. You may have done it. They come out of their show looking perfect. And you go, yeah, you need to get fat again. And they go, but I don't want to. Well, too bad. Doesn't really, I'm going to take 20 weeks to raise my calories. No, you're going to have to get fat again, whether you do it now, sooner or later. But they don't want to because it sucks. Once you've been that lean, it sucks not being that lean anymore. And they want to maintain contest shape year round. So I've gotten completely off topic, but yeah, so most of the data does really point to energy availability, which brings back sort of the question you asked, can excessive muscle mass play a role in this? And I couldn't find anything.
No, me neither. It was very, very difficult to actually find it because what we were trying to find the question or the answer to was whether a high percentage of muscle mass in women, whether they were assisted or natural athletes, could actually exert enough of an endocrine response or an endocrine effect, should I say, with subsequent interference on the cycle.
Right. And so for context for listeners that might not exactly what we're saying. So for years, like everyone thought, fat is just inert stuff, energy storage. And then leptin got discovered. And now we know that fat cells release like dozens of different chemicals to dozens of different tissues. They're called adipokines. Kines is it's just these short-lived chemical messengers. So adipokines, we know there's also, and so leptin, all kinds of things. Some go to your muscle and tell it what to do. Some of them are going to your brain. Some are going everywhere. There's also myokines, and these are chemicals released from skeletal muscle that is telling the rest of the body kind of what's going on. So they're now calling fat cells are now an endocrine system. Muscle is an endocrine organ. I've seen stuff, the stomach is real. The stomach is an endocrine organ, and I believe there's stuff that the skin is, like everything in our body is talking to everything else in our body, which is why this is oh so complicated. right? I'm so glad. I'm so glad I went to college in the early 90s because we had like 6 hormones and we were happy. We didn't know about any of this stuff.
Yeah.
I don't think I would have survived it if I had to learn about all. Like, I've tried to keep up for years and I've just given up now. There's so much stuff going on. I can't keep. I feel bad for anyone going to medical school or studying physiology right now because it is a million more complicated. And I really. So there's all. So as an example, there is it's called an interleukin, and these are these very short-lived chemicals. It's involved in fever. It's involved in a lot. When you're sick, you get this interleukin response that makes you feel crappy, right? And makes you want to sleep all day and not eat. And we are human. We're big, dumb humans, so we ignore that because, especially if we're athletes, and overtraining creates that same kind of inflammatory response. When you're starting to get overtrained, your body is saying, knock it off. And as big-brained humans who think we're smarter, we go, nope. I need to train harder because like whenever I see runners or cyclists, I'm like, you know what? Dogs know to come in out of the rain, and humans, and we're the smart ones. It's ridiculous. Anyway, so one of them, muscle releases something called interleukin 6. Now, during exercise, interleukin 6 tends to promote fat oxidation and do good things. And it gets released when glycogen is low. However, if it gets chronically high, it goes to the brain and says, we're fatigued now, right? The muscle is telling the brain we're running out of fuel stores so that the brain can possibly basically tell us to knock it off and slow the hell down. And then if you inject people with interleukin 6 and tell them to exercise, they crap out earlier. So it's one of those signals that can do good things in the short term, but can have negative effects in the long term. And I'm pretty sure when you start to get exhausted and muscle inflammation and damage that's unrepaired, interleukin 6 goes up and tells your brain to knock it off. And that's when you go do an extra hour of training because we're clearly just not working hard enough and we're being lazy because anyway. So I think what you asked me originally was, is there anything being released from muscle that could be doing that? And like you, I couldn't find anything. I could not find a damn thing. Now, to your other question, in assisted athletes, it gets more complicated. And so everyone knows when we talk about assisted, we're not talking about creatine and fish oils. We are talking about
whey protein.
Yeah, and whey protein and glucose. We are talking about, various performance-enhancing drugs. It's typically been anabolic steroids. We've now got, the SARMs, the selective androgen receptor modulators. And a dirty secret, even in the physique sports, right? Because even as they pushed back against pro bodybuilding, they backed up and now they're moving right back to where they were. I have been watching over the last decade what used to be classic bodybuilding, which was fairly lightly muscular. They're getting bigger every year. And it's important, even in fitness and physique and probably even bikini, they realize, we throw a little clenbuterol and thyroid in the mix. We throw just a little bit of Winstrol, which is kind of a very low effect anabolic. It doesn't do much in men at low doses, but in women, it's just keep a little more muscle, a little more hardness going in. And that is kind of a dirty secret of the physique sports. And that's why the women are and same thing in the men, I'm sure. When classic men's bodybuilding started, the men looked like pre-steroid era bodybuilders. Like they were big, they were cut, and they were in shape, but they weren't 280-pound monsters. They were 175-pound monsters because it's hard to take a guy at 165 cut, that seriously when the big boys are 300 cut. It just is. This is, as a natural, that's kind of where 165 is the big class. That's 75-ish kilos. That's the big class at most. And they backed way up. And they're just starting to climb back up the ranks. And it means that the ones that were behind them, men's physique, which is its own. Is there a men's fitness?
Well, it's a men's physique. So they have it's like bikini for men. Yeah.
The only comments I'll make, the board short round. I want to make a t-shirt that won't. Well, years ago we wanted to make a t-shirt. I had a training partner who's a natural pro bodybuilder, and we we're going to make a t-shirt that said "Wear long pants," and then on the back it's easier than training legs, or it's easier than play. And I want to make one like wear board shorts. It's easier than training legs. I know they do have decent legs, but it's a lot easier when you ever notice guys at the gym tank top, string tee, long pants in the middle of the summer.
Oh,
Dude,
yeah, completely.
couldn't even give you directions to the leg area. Yeah. Anyway, I've always liked squatting because I'm built for it. So I'm terrible. Anyway, so
Can
yeah.
you still squat now after your knee injury?
It was actually my lower. It was my femur. It was 2 years ago. I broke my fibula and tore 2 ligaments in my ankle.
That's it.
So I do like squatting, believe it or not. And I'd gone back to partial squatting because my shin, the shin just doesn't move at the ankle on that side anymore. And I could full squat like rock bottom. I did Olympic high bar squats for years, and just couldn't get there. And which was great. I thought that was value added. I'm like, I have a legitimate excuse to squat high now.
Yeah.
And for some dumb reason of my own, about 6 weeks ago, I just decided, you know what? I want to see if I can get back below parallel, because partial squatting, I just don't feel manly. And look, I'm 49 now. And for those of you who think that men ever get over this, we don't.
No.
You get a little smarter with age, right? I got away with a lot. Youth and stupidity will get you pretty far as a dude.
Yeah.
Probably we're not young anymore, but that little bit of macho never quite goes away.
No.
And I decided, you know what? I've got some Olympic shoes. Like maybe if I widen my stance, maybe I can grind and it's taken about, saying I have no mobility in that range, right? I've been squatting to a bench press bench. And over 6 weeks, I've gotten there. I had to turn my stance out, which I had to widen it a little bit, which feels weird to me, and regain that mobility. And I've gotten there, and every time I got to go do it later today. And I just did it I started high and then took a plate off and got to there to get a little bit. And it's taken me about 6 weeks to get there. And every time I go do it, because I'm weak as hell out of the bottom, I just keep thinking, why am I doing this?
Yeah, exactly.
What? Because every once in a while, because I train Sumi as a power lifter, every once in a while I think I should come out of retirement and do another meet. And then I invariably think about it and go, yeah, I get better. I don't want to do that.
No.
Anyway, getting back,
leg press to failure anyway, so leg pressing to failure is fine.
Almighty. So, and the reason I kept it in is just it's for bone mineral density. I do still kind of like squatting a little. I always did because I was good at it, so I enjoyed it in its own sick way. So I kept it in. It's partial for the longest time. I'm pretty close to below parallel. I'll feel it the next day. I'll feel it in my ankle because I think there's some tissues that are never going to get back to where they were. But I'm weak as hell. But anyway, so there is this getting back to physique and assisted athletes.
Yeah, sorry.
That alone can shut down the reproductive system. And it's not well studied because you cannot ethically give women steroids by and large and see what happens. Like not high doses,
Sure.
right? They studied it in postmenopausal women for like bone mineral density and surgical recovery. I did see one paper recently. They gave postmenopausal women injectable testosterone because it's very important for women's health, both bone density, body composition, sex drive. Let's just be real. It was ignored for decades, but they're really considering testosterone replacement for postmenopausal women. There's a lot of pushback towards it from old school docs. Testosterone's a men's hormone. No, dude, they both have it. We both have it. Men have estrogen. It's not one or the other. And they gave these women a baby dose, 25 milligrams a week, right? This is the men's studies give 100 to 600 milligrams, like where it's a 1/10 to 1/30th difference. It's tiny, tiny, tiny dose. And once a week, you don't get sort of a buildup. And it was at that dose, they gained some muscle, they lost body fat. There were no negatives reported except for one woman who said that the increase in her sex drive she thought it was a negative. And what that tells me is that her husband probably couldn't step up.
Yeah.
That's what I think. I think he wasn't able to keep up with her when that happened because he needed to be on some too. So by and large, they can't really study this ethically. Like probably the best study of it was what the Germans did to their women, which was to give them drugs and lie to them about it.
Yeah.
They did this all the time. Like it's all come out. They would take 15-year-old female swimmers and go, here's your vitamins. And because they didn't care. And they won a lot of medals, and they ruined these women forever. Like they're all masculinized. Several have reproductive dysfunction, infertility. Not that, and I hate to even bring this up because we can't say that this testosterone did it. At least one or two have decided to transition to men afterwards. So that could, I'm not saying that this was the drugs, but we know that at that age, a lot of things are still very plastic, including the brain. It is possible that masculinized the brain, whatever. It doesn't matter. The point of this is that it ruined these women. I mean, her last name is, it's either Baron Donk or Baron. I forget. She was one of the GDR swimmers, and she wrote a book about it. And they took the German Sports Federation to court and won.
Wow.
I mean, they took this very seriously because it did. And I've seen some papers talking about, the role of anabolics in female infertility. And some of this probably comes out of the polycystic ovary syndrome stuff, right? PCOS women they don't always have elevated testosterone, but most do. And when I say elevated, so the average woman runs between like 30 to 70 nanograms per deciliter. And I forget what that is in nanomoles. It's like 2.5 or lower. It's something in that range, nanomoles per liter, which I think is what other countries use. Yeah. PCOS women can have up to double that, right? Mm-hmm. So they may have up to 150 at the extreme cases. Now, men start at 300. So PCOS women never get to the level that even the lowest male will typically have. But doubling testosterone in women does have a profound physiological effect. And PCOS typically have more muscle mass. They're stronger even for the amount of muscle mass they have because testosterone affects neurological function, higher bone density. They have worse VO2 max. They also have eating disorders more frequently, and I don't know why that is. They are also found very frequently in high-level sport and in strength power sports. And I think we talked about that in a previous podcast. A lot of women who are drawn to more aggression-requiring sports, such as powerlifting, such as MMA, sports like that, you have to have a certain level of aggression to want to do that. And there is actually a paper where it's like netball players. I don't even know what netball is. It's some weird foreign sport. I know what lacrosse is. I know what field hockey is. I don't have a clue what the hell netball is. Isn't it soccer where you just run with the ball in your hand?
It's kind of like a female version of basketball, but you can't run with it. You have to, in the minute you have it, you can only move one foot.
Okay. In any case, they looked at athletes in some team sport, and women with higher testosterone picked harder workouts, right? Sure. So PCOS women that tend to be found overrepresented in high-level sport, winning medals and setting for these reasons. That alone can impact negatively. Like I said, oligomenorrhea, an infrequent menstrual cycle, is very common. And full-blown amenorrhea, loss of the menstrual cycle, is common, and that's because testosterone in this system is causing a lot of negatives. And for athletes, that's a benefit. For women who want to get pregnant or who want to be fertile, it also can impair health, causes insulin resistance, increased central body fat, more like a male body fat pattern around the midsection, increased heart disease risk. Like it's not all good. For female athletes, it is, but for women who want to have children or improve their health, frequently they give birth control, and birth control cuts testosterone in half. So that is a first-line treatment So that's part of the data set. I think there's limited work on women who've been given steroids, and that alone can cause long-term amenorrhea and a loss. So I think that is distinctly different from unassisted athletes, not on those special sports supplements. So I think that's probably a lot of what's going on in the assisted athletes. Is it's just because so in men, if you take steroids, the body goes, okay, you've got plenty of testosterone. I can stop making mine. Yeah. And what that does is it's a feedback loop, and it basically tells the brain to stop producing luteinizing hormone and follicle stimulating hormone. And what's interesting about that, to go to the too much, and so LH is part of testosterone production. So a man will stop producing natural testosterone. Now, it doesn't matter because he's got plenty in there from the drugs. And they've been looking at low-dose testosterone as a birth control method for men for a different reason. When follicle-stimulating hormone goes down, sperm production stops. Yeah. As another just interesting tidbit, a long-held side effect of long-term anabolic steroid abuse, men's testicles shrink. Yeah. You'll hear about men that they'll have testicles like raisins. They get tiny, tiny, tiny. And for some reason, I looked into this. Somebody asked me about it, and it turns out that there's an intratesticular testosterone that's different from what's in the blood. That's what's keeping testicle size normal.
Okay.
And they give men it's called human chorionic gonadotrophin, which is actually found in the urine of pregnant women. Your listeners are learning such fascinating things today.
Completely.
That resets the endocrine system. And so if they give men steroids and HCG, that will maintain testosterone in their testicles, and their nuts won't shrink.
Okay.
It will also maintain fertility if they want to. Like, to me, testosterone-induced infertility is, again, value added if you're a guy that doesn't want to have kids. Like, that's, and it's not 100%. There are men that are on steroids that but birth control isn't 100% either, or, hormonal birth control. So, and in women, well, what's even more interesting is that estrogen is the signal to the brain. It's actually not the increase in testosterone in men that tells the brain that it's elevated. It's the increase in estrogen production. Because in men with high estrogen, if you give them an anti-estrogen, testosterone levels go up.
Yeah.
And I would suspect it's the same in women, right? Women convert testosterone to estrogen in various tissues, but it's the same thing. If you give women anabolic steroids, just like if you give them hormonal birth control, as soon as the brain goes, boom, we got lots and lots and lots of extra estrogen, it tells the brain we can just shut everything down.
Mm.
So I would tend to think, I think that's what's going on in females who are assisted, but that doesn't explain the natural end of things. And what I think and I'm assuming you've seen women that are presumably eating enough, that are not super lean, that probably lost their menstrual cycle early on, who have a lot of muscle mass, but it never came back.
Exactly. And that is exactly what we were trying to figure out, even from anecdotal experience. Even when you gain the body fat and you have more energy availability from food sources coming in, so the body knows that it's not in that starvation kind of risk,
right?
The cycle still doesn't kind of kickstart itself. Now, is that going to be down to the fact that people can eat more as a natural, but then they still want to train hard, and it's the training stimulus that stops it?
I think it probably could be, but I have to wonder if it's not more, because again, we get sort of that crazy that's required for that sport. And as they eat more, they're training more intensely. Of course, the question is, well, if they're not in energy balance, they should be losing body fat. So there seems to be kind of a disconnect. Like, it's not quite that simple, because if energy availability falls too low, you do get into kind of that metabolic adaptation mode. They will find women who are in energy balance, but have menstrual cycle dysfunction because they are at energy balance below the critical threshold, right? It's usually runners and endurance athletes and those types of crazies. But as sort of an interesting, here's a side note on this. And it was a case study. This researcher named Trent Stellingwerf. He followed this one runner for 9 years.
Good
like
God.
this is a guy this is a researcher who's in it for the long haul.
Yeah, for sure.
And he tracked her over 9 competitive seasons of running. And I forget what her age was across this. But I mean, it would have taken her at least from like her mid-20s to her early 30s. And I'll come back to that. And what she would do, she would get super lean for her 3 or 4 month competitive cycle. But then she would gain a little bit of body fat back.
Okay.
Now, she stayed within a fairly low range, like 12 to 15%, which I think is either a measurement error or a little bit lower than most will be happy at. But endurance athletes are not trying to gain a lot of muscle. It's not like a strength power athlete or bodybuilder. And she would regain her menstrual cycle. And then she would train there with enough calories to make improvements. And then she would die. And interestingly, she set a lot of PRs every year. She never got stress fractures because she gained muscle mass very gradually over the course of the 9 years, but she was cycling her calories. So in that sense, like, she obviously did get her cycle back. One factor, and I address this kind of in the women's book, and there's very limited research on this. There is some research that the longer you lose your menstrual cycle for, the longer it takes to come back.
Sure.
And nobody seems to know why. I came across one paper that very helpfully suggested the body seems to have a memory of this. Okay, fantastic. What does that mean? Just make up a reason that would work this way. Just make up a mechanism.
Yeah.
kind of like for a year of researching this, they would talk about how some women's reproductive system were more robust, that they wouldn't get a menstrual cycle dysfunction. This is more robust than others. They never said what that meant.
No.
They said, well, we can't explain why some women do and some women don't lose their cycle, so we're just going to throw out this guess. Never found an explanation for what they were talking about. But there is that variability. So my question to you is, in the women you're seeing this in, had they been without a cycle for an extended period of time, like months or years in some cases?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I can even bring it back to, I've got, in fact, like 2 people that I can just bring out. They were both clients of mine. One was an assisted powerlifter,
Okay.
and she had amenorrhea for approximately 4 years.
Wow. Okay.
Okay, so that was a long time. I started coaching her. We didn't use any kind of exogenous drugs or anything like that. It was all down to diet, all down to specific training. She regained her cycle within about 3 months of us working together, just by sorting out her nutrition. So that actually goes against the argument. Now then, I had another lady who has 2 children. She was in the throes of anorexia. We worked together again for about 6 weeks. Now, she had not had a period since having her youngest child, which was over 6 years.
Okay.
And within 6 weeks, we regained her cycle very, very quickly. Now, don't get me wrong, with eating disorder clients that I work with, just by giving them energy but availability back, it's like a switch, right? So it's easy.
Sure. Yeah, at that super extreme, yes. But they also are not carrying a lot of muscle. So.
Correct, yeah. So we kind of like don't have that argument. But I mean, if you want to use me as an example, I lost my menstrual cycle back in November 2014.
Right, I remember we talked about this before.
Yeah, never came back. And yet I came off the back of a bodybuilding prep. I gained a lot of body fat to the point where I was actually really fat. I did carry on training, but it wasn't to the kind of intensity that I'm training now.
Sure.
Never came back. And yet, this is a question that obviously we were talking about as well a week ago. My hunger levels never regulated. No matter how much food that I was eating, I was still hungry as hell.
And that's really odd because at least, in the research realm, and realize they don't generally look at, it's only recently they've even started looking at physique competitors on any level. And there's more research being done, which I actually do like. I believe actually what drove it, Eric Helms wrote probably the first review paper on like evidence-based anything for physique athletes. And that seems to have made it okay to legitimize. Like there were early studies in bodybuilders back in the 70s and 80s, but it's always on pros and very limited. And I'm really seeing increasing research on this. So most of this comes out of just the general dieter. And typically what they see is, all right, they diet down and their hunger goes up and metabolic rate goes down. And if they maintain that lower level of body weight, it never does reverse itself completely. Like that, there's always residual hunger, and you'll hear people talk about that. But in premise, when they go back up to their previous body fat or higher, it generally reverses. Like there's been, I've come across very little that shows any sort of permanent issue in terms of hunger and metabolic rate, with 2 weird exceptions. So your listeners probably know about like non-exercise activity thermogenesis and all those calories you burn through fidgeting and this, that, and the other. And in 3 studies, 2 of them were in mountain climbers. Well, actually case studies. And one was in that biosphere experiment about 15 years ago.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Yeah, remember people, what they did is they wanted to see if you could make a completely enclosed, sustainable biosphere. So they took a bunch of people and put them in basically, I think of it as like a domed city, and they were supposed to like produce all their own food and deal with all their own waste. And it failed instantly. The crops just didn't, their food failed completely from like early on. And they all ended up dieting for 6 months because they all ended up calorie restriction for 6 months because there was no food. And apparently they weren't going to let them out. And after that, they found that there was like a permanent 5% reduction in NEAT that never came back. That is, I don't know why. It's the only time I've ever seen a paper even remotely suggest that there's a permanent change. So what I don't know, and so again, that's not, we're not talking about heavily muscled bodybuilders and physique athletes. I'm aware of no research. I mean, there's a couple of case studies. There's that one on the guy who dieted down and just came right back to 14% and everything went back to normal. I might ask, other than the hunger issue, do you find that your calorie intake or your maintenance calorie level is any different? Is it lower than it was before? Is it higher than it was before?
Much higher than it was before.
It is higher. Okay.
Yeah, much higher than it was before. And this is why I found it very, very interesting. And we can relate that back to people on the very, very severe end of the spectrum as well, like eating disorder people and like anorexics and things, because they suffer with hypermetabolism. So
yeah, which is weird as hell, right?
Yeah, completely weird. So I mean, they would need almost like 3 times the amount of the allotted calories just in order to just slightly push them into maintenance. And it's weird. And they suffer all different kinds of things, like heavy body sweating in the middle of the night because of this hypothermogenesis effect. And there's so much more to it. And yeah, it's a very, very strange thing. And yet I have seen that in the past where they have this hypermetabolism and yet their menstrual cycle comes back no problem. But they are still, of course, extremely hungry. Yeah,
and we've got a couple people with menstrual with eating disorders in my group, and I, of course, won't name them. And one of them asked me about that because you saw a claim that to regain like a pound of body weight, you needed like 7,000 calories a week. It was something and I'm like, that can't be right. And I looked, and I'll be damned. There is something. It's whether it's thermogenic, whether it's they start moving around all the time. I mean, there's even a weirdness that in some types of anorexia, because normally when we think of dieting, right, we're just exhausted all the time. You don't want to move, but there's a hyperactivity that can occur in some people. And they've done this in animal models, which I don't put a lot of, but they've seen this in humans too. And I think in premise, the idea is if you're moving around more, you can find food, but it makes the problem worse. Like for some reason, and then you've got this weird, it's hard enough to get someone coming out of a severe eating disorder to eat anything. I mean, that's the big argument. Like they try to get these women or these people in recovery, it's not all women, to eat even a few hundred calories more, and they won't do it. And now you're telling them, I want you to raise your calories by 1,000 a day. Good luck.
Yeah, exactly. And stop moving as well.
And for some reason, and even in hospital situations, right? It's not like you're giving them the 1,000 and they're not eating anything else. They are monitoring every molecule going into their body, and it doesn't work. And I don't know if it's just like the most super insulin sensitivity, and because there's that thermic effect, which is the sweats. There's that hyperactivity that comes out of it that burns off the calories. It's almost like, okay, the body, and I hate to say wants, but like is really fighting to not put on weight. And it goes against all of the other data showing that the body is just primed for fat gain.
Yeah.
Now, it could be genetic. It could be part of the eating disorder. Given that many eating disorders start right about puberty, maybe it's that. Maybe we're seeing kind of like in other domains. Like we know that if you train really well during puberty, men especially, it's a natural steroid cycle. Man, they gain muscle that never goes away. Because the body, like maybe girls or boys who have an eating disorder when they hit puberty, maybe that is causing a permanent change in the brain. And it's a difference in aging between gaining weight when you're or having that happen later in life. Because if you take people that are overweight and diet them down, their body always wants to go back to where they were.
For sure, yeah.
It sounds like it's working exactly the opposite. That if you establish whatever this super low set point or whatever you want to think of it as, that it is causing a permanent change, that's where their body wants to be.
Yeah.
Like I said, it doesn't seem to be consciously behavioral. To your point, it is a biological response that goes against everything we think we know. And it's never been my area of expertise, but I'm familiar with the research, and it almost sounds like you've got something similar going on, right? Because in theory, as you regain the muscle mass, as you regain the body fat, and we don't like fluffy, I believe is the proper word in the fitness tank. You have to be a little fluffy in the off season, or get a little fluff, as people like to put it. In premise, like that should have gone away. Now, what's interesting, and we talked about this a little bit in private message. we used to think that hunger was a lot of things. And first it was behavioral, and then it was environmental, and it's all those things. But then it was body fat. And then there's been this new thing that, skeletal muscle actually there is an appetite signal to it. And it works in both directions. So there's been this idea for decades that needs drive behavior. That if your body needs more calories because you're bigger or have more muscle, that drives appetite. Yeah. And there might be something, men are known to have generally a higher appetite, need more calories than women. They tend to think that's a testosterone issue, but it could be. But now we know that muscle mass, again, with all those myokines, is sending a signal to the brain. And I believe I've seen work that if you have more muscle mass, that alone can drive hunger. It is essentially trying to support itself calorically.
Yeah.
But what's interesting is it works the other way around. Right? If you go way back, you look at these studies on dieting, and they dieted them terribly. Low protein, no exercise, and they would lose muscle mass, and they would lose body fat. And when you would refeed them, they would get a body fat overshoot. Right? This is where the whole yo-yo dieting thing, I think, sort of comes from. They would gain more body fat than they started with. But what it turns out is that because when you lose muscle mass, that is driving hunger as well as the low body fat, or the lowered body fat. So what was happening is that body fat was coming up like this. So you start dieting, right? Body fat comes here, but you lose some muscle mass. Yeah. You start regaining body fat, and you're eventually, but until muscle mass got back to where it was, appetite wouldn't shut off. Which really points to the need to diet rationally, which is you want to minimize muscle loss to as great a degree as possible on the way down, which means sufficient protein, heavy weight training, everything your people have heard you talk about, probably every podcast you've ever done. But it's true. Like, this is legitimately, like, that should be a requirement. And then when you start coming out of the diet, you need to be doing heavy weight training, getting enough protein, because that will ensure that any muscle you lost, that will get you back to normal as quickly as possible. So muscle does seem to be sending an appetite signal possibly in both directions. It may be driving hunger when it's high, but it's absolutely driving hunger when it's lost and being regained. Yeah. Which doesn't really answer the question of menstrual cycle, and does skeletal muscle have an effect? Given the body fat issue, it does come back to the question: is this an issue of total amount of body fat or body fat percentage? Right? Because if you take someone, right, and they're 130 pounds, and they've got 20% body fat, and they gain 10 or 15 pounds of muscle over 20 pounds of muscle over a career. If they gain, 20 pounds, about 8 kilos of body fat, if their body fat doesn't change, their body fat percentage will go down somewhat.
And then you're on that level. Then you're on that.
And I don't remember. It's been a really long time. All the leptin research was in like the early to late 90s when I was looking at it. I can't recall if they ever decided if it was a total body fat thing or a body fat percentage thing. But that would be the only conceivable mechanism. But to your point, if you regained more body fat than you had and have a higher body fat percentage, that still wouldn't explain it.
But at the same time, because I was still training, and I was training hard, and if you have a look at the comparison pictures, I also need a lot of muscle tissue. Right. So I might ask, and this is what I wanted to sort of mention, right? This running study. And this actually goes back to something else. So when Ann Lukes was doing all this research, right, she did it every study known to God and man. She looked at every possible permutation, like a good obsessed scientist. It's always funny to me. Scientists just have like that thing they want to study, and that's what they do for 20 solid years, which is perfectly fine. But I always get really concerned about the researchers who like to study like the gut microbiota, because what it means is they're sifting through poo. Nice. And I don't know if it's, I hate to make this joke, I don't know if it's German researchers by and large, and sorry, can't resist that one. But I do really question the guys who are like, you know what, man, when I grow up, I want to study poo. I don't anyway. But one of the studies she did was to look at what's called reproductive age. Now, reproductive age is not the same as biological age. Reproductive age is the number of years that a woman has been menstruating. So if you take two women who are at 30 years old, one starts menstruating at 15 and one at 19, the 15-year-old, the one who started menstruating at 15 will have a 15-year-old reproductive age, the one at 19, 11. Yeah.
What she found was that once women are past a 14-year reproductive age, their systems become more robust, whatever the hell that means. Basically, like young girls, when they first start hit puberty and start menstruating, their cycles are just totally unstable, right? And ovulation is common. There's no consistency to it, and it gets more stable with age. And supposedly, that 14-year mark is exactly the same time it takes a woman's pelvis to fully mature. It's got something to do with making babies.
Okay.
And bone probably is releasing. I'm sure there's bone okines or whatever they're called. I'm sure bone is releasing something that's telling the body, hey, we're now in the perfect place to like have babies the most safely. And like I said, this system is so much more complicated than it used to be. So one thing that does occur to me that I think we forget sometimes is if you're looking at someone like yourself, right, who lost your menstrual cycle 5 years ago or 2014, there's an age factor that we do tend to forget.
Yeah.
That we are often comparing someone who may have been 25 when this started and is now 30, and the system has changed.
Yeah.
But if anything, it should be working in the opposite direction. If anything, as the system becomes more stable with age, I would think it would be better. Now as we get much older, right, you get women who are like, oh, at 40, I lost my cycle, and now 5. It's like, well, I have bad news for you. You are now entering the time of life where you're getting to perimenopause. I mean, menopause can start as early as 40 and even earlier in some rare cases. Like, well, now there's kind of the middle ground, right? We know that, all right, you're 15 to 25, everything should be, maybe not if you had an eating disorder. 25 to 35, you should be in kind of a sweet spot. And then once you start to get into those 40s, you're now coming down the other side of the curve where menstrual cycle may start to become a little off. But it's not lost immediately.
No.
Right? Perimenopause menstrual cycle will become irregular and less common. Like it's not full-blown menopause, so you have a cycle for a year. Because you can lose your cycle for 11 months, and then if you get one, your doctor will go, nope, not menopause, and they start the clock over.
Yeah.
It happened to a friend of mine. So I do think there's that, but if anything, the aging thing should make it better. Because unless you're getting into that mid to late 40s, and you're not. Certainly.
No, absolutely not. Not yet. Not yet.
Yeah. So I don't necessarily, same thing with men, right? And guys are like, oh, suddenly bad things are happening because I'm in my late 40s and 50s, and testosterone, and I don't feel as good, and things aren't working as well down below. What am I doing wrong? You're getting old, dude. That's what you're doing wrong.
Absolutely. Welcome to the cycle of life.
Yeah, aging's a trap, and it sucks, man. I'm glad we, get the little blue pills, and sorry, dude, this is just how things work.
Amazing.
And it sucks. Yeah, so Billy said that. So it's really a good question, and I don't know. There is an individual variability. That was another thing that there is a genetic component to amenorrhea, and maybe the duration. Well, let me back up. How long has it been since you started eating more, since you got fluffy? So you had the however many years where you didn't have a menstrual cycle, then you started eating more, regained body fat. How long has it been that you've been doing that compared to how long you lost your menstrual cycle?
So let's have a look. So I competed in the September of 2015.
Okay.
So then from September 2015 until September 2017, I was increasing calories and went quite heavy.
Okay.
I competed again in 2017. So obviously I reduced my calories, reduced my body fat.
Okay.
And then since September of 2017, I have just gradually increased my calories up until the point where I am now.
Okay. So it's been, a decent period of time. But sort of with some variability, with some time periods where you're kind of dieting back down and dieting back up.
Yeah.
Like I said, there's people that are like, oh, the body has a memory of this, and I'd be damned what would possibly, because there's often a weird delay. Like women will diet for a month and then go back to maintenance, and they'll lose their cycle in the month that they're at maintenance, because it's like, but no biological system is occurring immediately, right? That would make no sense. If you lost your menstrual cycle as soon as you started dieting, that would make no sense. It's sort of a chronic food thing. So, I mean, it could be, it could just take longer. I remember when I looked at some of the research, even in athletes, some women get it back quickly. it's like a month or two. Some it's 6 months to a year. And even then, it doesn't get completely stable for longer after that. One of the case studies I looked at in the women's book, and it was a physique competitor who basically did everything wrong in the sense of when she started dieting, she was at like 32K cal per kilogram energy availability. Like she was starting, right? And most good physique coaches will say, you want to start dieting, eating as many calories as you can without gaining fat.
Sure.
High and as high as you can, so that she within the first week she went below the 30 value. Over a 6-month prep, she lost her period a month in, so she had 5 months to show where she had no menstrual cycle, and then she took 20 weeks to raise her calories anywhere close to maintenance, which is so that was right there. That was 10 months, 9 months. Yeah. It took her an additional 18 months to regain even semi-normal menstrual cycle function. So she basically lost her menstrual cycle for 5, 9, and then it took her 18 months. And I don't know what her calories necessarily were, but she didn't start regaining body fat till the 20. So there are at least the occasional case where it just takes a couple of years.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely.
And it is interesting you mentioned the diet thing, right? Actually, Sumi was having for about half a year, and again, it was after like a physique photo shoot. And her doctors couldn't do anything. They did all the standard. It's like a progesterone provocation test and other stuff, and nothing worked. And then I was researching the women's book, and I'm like, all right, I want you to do this with your diet, and raised her fat, this and that, and the other. Within a month, she got it back. Now, I would love to take full credit for that. I will take full credit for that, but it's entirely possible that was just the time.
Yeah.
Right? That was just it. She needed a year and a month. I tend to doubt it because I don't think when I looked at her diet, it was too much protein, too little fat, and that certainly plays a role. So it could just be a time thing. Have you ever gotten diagnosed with PCOS? Or I think I asked you about this before, if you've ever gotten checked for elevated testosterone?
Yeah, checked for all of that, and no, all of the biomarkers are absolutely fine.
Huh, interesting.
Isn't it?
And like, did they check like luteinizing hormone and FSH? Like they've measured that stuff? Really?
Yeah, absolutely. When we're off air, what I'll do is I'll share my blood's results with yourself, so you can actually have a look at and analyze of them. Because I won't put that for the listeners' pleasure. Shall we say?
Yeah, no, of course. I just find that really surprising that like everything else would be normal, because it would almost like that. Obviously, I hate to use the word defect, but obviously the problem, right, is not centrally, right? Your brain is sending the right signals. And this happens sometimes, right? There can be like different types of thyroid dysfunction. Sometimes if you're dieting, the brain is not sending the right signals. Sometimes it's sending the right signals and the thyroid gland is not responding for whatever odd reason, and that's differences between like diet-induced hypothyroid and true hypothyroid. So what it sounds like to me is, for whatever reason, like your body is sending, your ovaries and the right signals, but that system, for whatever reason, is not responding to them. And I can't even, because what I would have almost expected, like what we talked about, is that for some reason the LH and the FSH signal weren't right. But if those are normal and you're not menstruating or not producing an egg or any of those things, then it's somewhere peripheral. It's somewhere in like ovarian dysfunction or something to that effect. And that's a whole different can of worms. It's way like, but your OBGYNs can't seem to get to the bottom of that. I find that really surprising. And I don't know what tests there would be. I mean, you can check for ovulation. I know there's, at least in the US, we've got like tests that you can, I think they've even got like morning blood tests that will basically, you can take. It would be interesting to me to know if because if you're not ovulating, that's first, because if you're not ovulating and producing an egg, your body's not producing the corpus luteum, which is when the follicle explodes. And I love that terminology. Like they don't say, sometimes they say burst, but they're like, boom, the follicle explodes. And I'm just like movie explosion inside a woman. But the remainder of that follicle forms the corpus luteum, which forms the endometrium for egg and blah, 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 blah. And what menstruation technically is shedding that tissue because it wasn't, since you didn't get pregnant.
Yeah.
So if you're not ovulating, you will generally not form an endometrium. so you won't menstruate. Like, it's not universally true. Women who are not ovulating frequently will still menstruate, less. That's one of those middle menstrual cycle dysfunctions. So like, I'd be curious if you were ovulating, but I don't know how you'd even determine it, because that a menstrual cycle, there's no telling where the hell in your cycle you are on any given day. Or like you'd have to check hormones so frequently. When they've checked like estrogen and progesterone, are those in the normal range?
What I'll do is I'll get my bloods out and we can have a discussion about it another time. But yeah, it is an interesting one. So guys, we are completely up on time here. However, guys, if you have got any kind of experience with this or anecdotal experience,
I really love to hear it.
If you know studies out there about what myself and Lyle have discussed today, then obviously please share them either in the comments on this particular podcast, or share them in Lyle's group, or even send myself a message. Don't bother Lyle, just message me and I'll discuss it.
She'll bother me.
Yeah, I'll bother Lyle. It's absolutely fine. But yeah, anything to do with like increased muscle mass, and whether or not you have experiences yourself with, energy balance, hunger, appetite control when you're having a higher muscle mass, it'd just be really, really interesting to do it from there. So anyway, Lyle, thank you ever so much again for giving me your time again. I'm pretty sure we'll have another conversation.
One comment I want to make before we sign off, I just sent you a link to an Amazon book. It's called No Period, Now What? A Guide to Resetting Your Cycles. Fantastic book. I read this while I was researching mine. It's by Dr. Nicola J. Rinaldi. I don't know who the middle guy is, and Lisa Sanfilippo Waddell and Mallory Blond is the illustrator. Lisa's actually in my group. I've communicated with them pretty extensively when I was researching the women's book. It's an amazing resource. It goes through a lot of things I don't, as far as like life stress, and that I didn't get into in the women's book because it was not really on topic for me. You might approach her. Dr. Rinaldi,
previously.
Oh, she has. Okay, fantastic. She might, just because, like I said, this is what she does and what Lisa do. This is like their focus, and they are both amazing. Definitely. So she might have seen something or have some thoughts on this beyond what you or I could find.
Indeed, yeah.
And just for your listeners, like if you want to really, like if you're having issues with this, it is a fantastic book.
Yeah, definitely. So I'll make sure that resource is in the comments section as well for anybody who wants to actually get that. But like I said, guys, if you've got any questions or any experiences that you want to share with ourselves, then please obviously put them in the comments section and we will get back to them. And then, yes, we will look forward to another podcast with myself and Lyle very, very soon. So, guys, thank you ever so much again for tuning in to Don't Fear the Wait. Lyle, thank you so much again. You enjoy your 100-degree weather over there in Austin.
Yeah, right.
And I will catch up with you again very, very soon. Thanks again, guys. See you.
Thanks.